Blue-Green Infrastructure Working Group. Up you come, Justin. Yes.
My name is Justin Halliday. I'm the convener of the PCAN Blue-Green Infrastructure Group. That means that we work with the blue stuff, the water, and the green stuff, which is trees and greening. And I am also standing as an independent candidate this election in Elwood as a direct result of the work that I've done through PCAN. A lot of things we talk about here are framed around 2100, which seems like a long time away from that. So I'd like to just ask, anyone here born in 1950 or earlier, or around there, put your hand up. There's a lot of people here who are alive in the time frame and still with us in the time frame that we're talking about here today. So while these might seem like they are a long time in the future, these are real impacts that we're going to see in the lifetime of many of the people. Many of the people in the room, but also many of our loved ones, our relatives and our friends. This is me, we've gone through this. Now, right now the science is split in two different kind of directions. There's the establishment science and there's the kind of vanguard science that is looking at climate impacts. On the establishment side we have Michael Mann, who is the go-to guy if you want a quote about getting to net zero by 2050 or this being a crucial 10 years or something like that. And on the vanguard side we have James Hansen here, who is doing the groundbreaking work around global warming in the pipeline and sea level rise in the pipeline as well. So these kind of represent the two types of thinking that we have around climate impacts that we're going to see. And the IPCC, we've heard from them a lot. We signed up to the Paris Commitment in and out, all the time. But they project, the Paris Commitment commits us to trying to reach or trying not to exceed 1.5 degrees with a limit of 2 and trying to get as close to 1.5 as possible by 2100. And that also means that we're also trying to reach net zero by 2050. That means getting rid of all of our emissions out of all of our economies by 2050 or mitigating them somehow. And the problem with the Paris Agreement is that embedded in it is this idea of overshoot. We're going to go above these temperatures in the short term, and we're going to use two technologies, BECCS, biological carbon capture and storage, and carbon capture and storage itself to bring down our carbon emissions in the back half of the century so that we can come back to these temperatures. However, the latest science tells us that we are nowhere near on track for these targets. We are on track for 2.5 to 3.5 degrees of warming. We are nowhere near on track for net zero by 2050. And our technologies that a lot of these projections are based on, be it BECCS, it's called, and CCS, are fancy technologies that are basically, handouts for the fossil fuel companies to keep doing what they're doing. And you might have heard a lot about the renewable revolution, how well we're doing at renewables, and you'll see from this. We've got hydropower down the bottom, but we've got at the top, we've got wind and solar really accelerating the kind of rollout of wind and solar and the huge impact that this is happening in our world economy. Unfortunately, this, as the President mentioned, this has not displaced one bit of fossil fuel emissions that we're burning through at the moment. So you can see up here, wind and solar are these tiny little components at the top here. The trajectory is still going up. And if we were to reach net zero by 2050, this line here needs to come down at 7 to 10% a year for the next 25 years. And we didn't even achieve that during COVID when we all stayed at home. So, we're not going to make it. This is not happening. Unless civilization collapses in the next 25 years, which might happen. But getting to net zero by 2050 is not happening. So, the other side, so I'm talking here about sea level rise and coastal hazards. I'm getting to a point, which is that right now all of our planning and all of our projections are based around this 0.8 metres, 80 centimetres of sea level rise by 2100. And the IPCC projections that this is based on tell us that the Antarctica and Greenland will not contribute significantly to this sea level rise. But the vanguard science, latest science, tells us that this is vastly out of date, we're on track for more like 1.4, and there are plausible scenarios, as David says, for 2, 3 or more metres of sea level rise this century. A lot of that contributed by Greenland in Antarctica, and that's totally transformative for a place like ours. And just on the longer term, because a lot of those things, they end at 2100, but in the longer term, we are locked in now for something like 6 to 10 metres of sea level rise already. Locked in, can't avoid it, can't stop it. So we need to prepare ourselves in the longer term for much more sea level rise. Getting more close to where we live right now, on the left here we have this beautiful map by the Eco Centre. You can get a copy of this map from them, which is from the early survey maps of the City of Port, well, not the City of Port Phillip, back then, the Elwood clans lands, and you can see that a lot of it is swamps. And over the last 150 years, we dammed it, we drained it, we paved over it, and we hemmed it in, and we turned it into what we now know as the City of Port Phillip. And you can see here, this is an elevation map of the City of Port Phillip. All of the kind of stuff here in Aqua is low-lying land. So there's kind of a couple of sections that are higher. One of them is around South Melbourne. The other one is they split through St Kilda and St Kilda East and a little bit of the south of Ballard Harbour. But we have a large amount of our city that is in very low-lying areas. And the projections so far, and this is why nobody is panicking so far about this, because the 0.8 metre projections have very little impact here on our city. There's a little bit of inundation here in Elwood, a little bit here through Southbank. People are going to get their feet wet. Council's not worried, state government's not worried. I'm not sure if Nina is still left. She left before the good bit. Unfortunately, so this is why people aren't worried. But we're probably not going to get 0.8. The latest projections now are for more like 1.4 as a plausible scenario, and we've got some other things that we'll go on top of this as well. At 1.4 metres, you see this much bigger impact here on Elwood, much bigger impact here through St Kilda West, through Middle Park, through Elwood Park, through South Melbourne, through Port Melbourne, and through Southbank. This is just at 1.4 metres. And the problem with these projections, you look at those 1.4, not great, not terrible. A lot of people in Elwood are going to have very wet feet. A lot of people in Middle Park are going to have very wet feet. This is from Chernobyl. This is a quote from the TV show Chernobyl, where their measuring instruments weren't telling them the actual magnitude of the problem they were facing, and they thought it was under control, but it actually wasn't. Next year. David also mentioned storm surge, and you can't take sea level rise in isolation. You need to also look at storm surge. In one of these significant, storm events, you might have up to 1.75 metres of storm surge action here. This comes on top of your sea level rise. So when we're talking about, 1 in 100-year floods, 1 in 1,000-year floods, you have to take these in the context of a bunch of storm surge coming in on top of the sea level rise you have. And you also, here in the City of Port Phillip, we have riverine flooding coming down the Oscar Canal, coming through Balclava, and coming on the Yarra River as well. And that means that we're looking at scenarios that are more like possibly 2.4 metres with storm surge, with riverine flooding, or possibly 3 metres here. I think that would show a little bit of the 3 metre of sea level rise impact here. And this could be 3 metres of sea level rise, or it could be 1 metre of sea level rise and 1.7 of storm surge and a little bit of riverine flooding. You might get these earlier. We keep doing this faster than expected. So all of these climate impacts are happening faster than expected. So where we're talking about 2100, we might get some of these impacts much earlier in the century because of these compounding factors with the sea level rise, with the storm surge, and with the riverine flooding. So that's nice. But surely there's future problems, right? We don't have to worry about this. 2100 is a long time away. This is from 2 years ago. This is someone trying to get insurance in Port Melbourne and getting quoted $20,000 from their insurance, for flood insurance, premiums, now simple. Luckily, they managed to get it down to only $8,000 of flood cover for their flood premium by getting rid of the flood related to the sea aspect of it. So, not so bad, that's so good. But this is the reality we live in. For people like us, the climate emergency will manifest economically first. You will see it in cost of living, you will see it in your insurances, you will see it in the council rates you pay, your taxes you pay, and you'll see it in things like this. The other thing you'll see it in economically is the value of properties. Banks, at some point, are going to say, hey, your property is in an area that we are no longer comfortable lending you money for 30 years based on. So here, this is in Kensington, after the Melbourne floods, where with the release of the new flood maps, banks started to change their behaviours here because they were seeing the risk. And, you know, they're seeing erosion of the property values in these areas. So these are real impacts that are happening now to people who are alive based on, you know, risk, current risk and future risks. One thing we're doing great on though is how many suburbs we have in the top 30 most impacted by flood risk in Victoria. So we can give ourselves a round of applause for this. We have 7.5 suburbs out of the top 30 here. So Southbank, we don't have all of Southbank, we have some of this. And this is ordered by the number of properties in the number of high-risk properties, right? So here we have Southbank, Port Melbourne, Elwood, South Melbourne, Middle Park, Elwood Park, St Kilda and St Kilda West. And then you've got 10, 20, 30,000 properties here in this high-risk column across the City of Port Phillip. Again, this is looking at 2100, but as we know, some of these risks can happen earlier, some of these impacts can happen earlier. When we're talking about individuals here, the impacts that we've talked about are in the insurance, they're retrofitting their homes, the property values, just the flood damage from a flood event that might happen, the endangerment to people's lives of flood impacts on us, and finally, you know, if you are displaced by floods, your homes may become unlivable. These are real impacts that the sea level rise and floods can have. What impact will this have on council? That's what we're here to talk about. Council right now is using this 0.8 metres as their threshold for planning decisions and for infrastructure investment across our city. That's our money that they're spending, or our money collectively through our rates, or individual money that they're allowing to be spent on new developments. When we talk about something like Fisherman's Bend, to the question earlier, all the Fisherman's Bend properties will be based on the planning applications, the approvals will be based on 0.8 of a metre. But there are, you know, as we say, scenarios there where they're looking at 1 or 2 metres of sea level rise during the lifespan of those properties. So they are under risk, over risk for those impacts. Council, in the council budget right now, today, has $30 million for Elwood infrastructure investment. We've just spent $12 million on Lagoon Reserve that will no doubt be a lagoon again by the end of the century. We have this St Kilda Marina project, which is a huge liability for council. We're already on the hook for soil remediation for that, maybe $10 million, maybe more. But that's also based on a 0.8 metre of sea level rise. And council is liable for the insurance costs of that project, and then they pass them on to the actual the vendor of that project, which means that we pay those insurance costs first before they pay. If they bounce out because they can't pay it, we're on the hook for those things. And eventually, council rates and expenditure are going to be problematic. Council will lose rates revenue because property values are degraded. Council will be spending more on flood mitigation and insurance. And the other one here is our infrastructure, our stormwater and sewage infrastructure will stop working as we get to these higher levels of sea level rise. So these are not good. One thing he just thought, you know, when we're talking about state government, it's not clear who's liable for this. If a house becomes permanently inundated, we don't know who's liable for it. The Compass report that we saw earlier identified about $5 billion worth of real estate here in the City of Port Phillip that could be impacted. The Coastal Hazards Assessment had about 37% of the City of Port Phillip impacted by floods and flooding. or potentially impacted by floods and flooding by the end of the century. That's 37%. That's more like $20 billion worth of infrastructure at today's dollars. And that's houses, that's people's houses. Lastly, what should council do? First, get these updated flood maps. We need these urgently from the city, from Melbourne Water. Until we have them, we don't have a real picture of what the flood risks are. Revise these sea level projections, update the planning scheme. We need realistic sea level rise embedded into the planning scheme so people are prepared for the risks we have. Heritage exemptions, we've talked already. A lot of the houses that are in these long low-lying areas are heritage protected. They can't retrofit their houses to prepare for the flood risks. And review these projects here that we have a large investment in as a council. Finally, advocating state government, because we need a state government-led response to this. Councils can't be left alone to try to manage these risks. And you might say, can't we stop this? We'll get rid of our emissions, we'll stop the flooding, everything will be fine. Unfortunately, sea level rise over the longer term is unstoppable because we've already passed the thresholds of melting for Antarctica, for Greenland. It's going to happen. We're just arguing here about the amount. And when we reach these high levels of sea level rise, we're going to have a whole range of other problems. So our problems here in the City of Port Phillip are going to be very minor compared to the problems that David Spratt talked about that we'll see around the world that will cause enormous geopolitical problems. So, in the context of the City of Port Phillip, we are right now in the proverbial and the literal calm before the storm. We have maybe 10, maybe 25 years to prepare our city for whatever challenges we face in the back half of the century. And that's why we have to be serious about things like flood risk. We have to be serious about our urban forests and our community. And we have to be serious about the investments we make and ensure that we make good investments rather than throwing money into areas that will make our situation worse in the future. So we need to get serious about this and we need to get serious about it fast. Thank you very much.